you guys are going to school me on what Kubernetes is, right?
Yep, from a couple different perspectives, actually.
So let's start with what is it?
So I learned this, I feel like it was a month or two ago now, but Kubernetes means helmsman in, I think, Greek. That's right. Yeah. So us nerds in our like boat and ship terms, you know, Star Trek and whatnot. It's a really good name for it, though. It's good.
Yeah.
Describes it really well.
I guess the Greeks were sailors, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Probably.
They should have a word for it.
Also, the nerd in all of us really need to understand where names come from. Like, we can't just let it be. We have to know.
Do you want to talk through that stack, Docker and Kubernetes? And
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess I'm going to start actually from a high level. So Kubernetes, the name is actually really important here, right? I mean, names are really important in general, but the name here I think really helps sum it up. So helmsman, it really is kind of the thing. Kubernetes is the system that controls our application infrastructure. You know, it really does kind of sit at the helm, I guess, at the wheel of that. It can touch and control basically every aspect of our company's application infrastructure. So it's a really good name for it. So yeah, so we use Kubernetes here at Bento. We've been using it since the beginning of the year. It's 2019. It's what now, June? So we've been using it for a few months at least, and it's been quite the process. I mean, we'll dive into a little bit more, but we've learned a lot through that transition, and a lot of good has come out of it. Obviously, there's been some hiccups and some speed bumps along the way, but overall, I would say that it's been nothing but a net positive across the board, really, in a lot of different areas for the company. So really happy with that transition and the way it's been working out for us. So the stack for us looks like we've got I guess the first thing that we had to do to transition ourselves over to Kubernetes was we had to containerize our application. And so that's a pretty familiar process for a lot of developers nowadays. So containers have been around for quite a few years now, the concept, and it's pretty healthy, a healthy paradigm, I think, for programmers and developers nowadays, to put things in a container. And there's a lot of different ways to containerize an application, but we use Docker at Bento. Pretty industry standard stuff. And I guess to back up for a second, so what is a container, right? Again, stolen from boats. Containers, it's really stolen from the shipping industry, container shipping industry, right? So these big barges, these big container shipping boats, they stack on, these hundreds of containers onto a ship, send it on across the ocean, and then unpack them, and that's what these ships do. They just transport containers. And the beauty of that, the shipping industry, headed this way towards containers because now they really don't have to think about what a specific client is shipping, right? If you can fit it in a container, here's the rate, and that's what it is, right? So you can get it in a container, whether that container is 25% full or 100% full, or it doesn't matter to the shipping company, because all containers to them look the same. They have the same physically, they look the same, right? So even the trucks and the cranes that move the containers around, they don't care what's in the containers specifically, because all the containers are the same thing. And so we apply that same principle to applications and to services and microservices. That's what containerizing an application really is basically setting up an environment that your application or your microservice can run in a contained way, right? It's a shippable piece of work. And so it doesn't need any other outside requirements to run. It has all of the necessary requirements that it needs to be productive in your environment. It has all of that kind of baked into that container. So we did that to our application. We did that, sometime last year. And it's allowed for a lot of portability. And then, one of the big things that we get out of that is, now our application is broken into these different containers that provide different services. And so that's kind of one portion of the stack. And then the next layer is that we can take those containers and we can give them to a container scheduler. And Kubernetes is one of those schedulers. So there are other container scheduling services out there. Kubernetes is just the biggest and most widely used right now.
So I guess why did we choose Kubernetes and why did we need it?
Right. And so there's kind of two things that we can, or two ways that we benefited from it. And I'll speak to one of them, and then Zach can kind of speak to the other. But one of the big reasons that we moved to containers and then subsequently moved to Kubernetes is that just like the shipping company or shipping industry, we don't really have to, on the infrastructure side of things, so on the DevOps side of things, that portion of the team doesn't have to worry so much about the specific requirements of each microservice or each service that is being deployed into the infrastructure. So when a developer on the team needs to, create a new service to generate PDFs, they can do that and package in a container and then deploy that to Kubernetes, and Kubernetes will take that container and schedule it automatically across the right computing resources. So the actual, Kubernetes calls them nodes, but they're essentially computers, right? Each server is a node in Kubernetes, and Kubernetes takes those containers and puts them on puts the container on the right node and makes it, run. So it takes a lot of the burden of the process to launch an application before Kubernetes was just a nightmare. People in our industry talk about no push Fridays, where basically if you have a set of commits, a set of code changes that you want to make, and you don't get them up into the repository by, let's say, lunchtime on a Friday, then just don't bother, because no one's going to want to release that code to production, because if they do, there's a chance that it could break. And now, you've wasted your Friday evening and potentially Saturday early morning trying to debug a production bug that you introduced because you decided to push something up at Friday at 3:00. Kubernetes has really limited the effect, if not completely removed that stigma from our development environment. No one on the team is really scared to hit that promote button anymore, because pushing to production, we do that so often now that we could almost kind of do it in our sleep. We know that the code works. We know that the process works every time because we do it, over 10, 20 times a day. And so we don't have the fear of breaking production. And so that's a big deal for our operation side of things.
Yeah, I think I deployed to production like last night at like 11 o'clock or something, and never would have done that before Kubernetes.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful thing for knowing that when you do make a change and want to roll it out, that here's the thing, even if things don't go right, for some reason that release didn't go the way that you thought it would, it takes almost no time to roll Kubernetes back to a version that was working. And that's the other side of the DevOps puzzle here is, you know, again, assuming everything goes well, that's great. You know, it didn't really, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of effort there. But even when things do go wrong, and occasionally they do, rolling back and getting the application back to a state where it's working for your users is very, you know, it takes us minutes, if not under a minute, depending on how quickly we catch that rollout problem.
So in the past, you would not have pushed up a change at any time in the afternoon, really, unless you knew you were going to have time to fix it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, usually we'd probably, you know, we'd save pushing to production for during the business week and usually in the mornings. Because again, you know, even if it's a Monday, who wants to push something up to production that could break it at 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon?
Right.
And it's, I guess it's another conversation, but that in combination with the trunk-based development, to switch over to that, like, because you can push so often, then it means that each push contains less changes. So there's less worry about, like if you've got a big change log and you got to push that all at once, then all of a sudden you're way more nervous than you would be if it's just a small change. A lot of little changes.
So it sounds like it's made, go ahead.
I was just going to say, they talk about this being almost, it's like a negative cycle, right? Like you wait, if you're scared to push to production.
Blowing up.
Sorry. Yeah, still ringing in my ears. So I gotta wait.
Yeah, all the things start ringing when you're this deeply ingrained with Apple.
Yeah, so I forgot where I was going with that.
The short cycle or the negative.
Oh, that's right.
Loop.
Right. So when you wait to push, you know, a no push Friday situation again, by waiting to push those changes that you made, waiting till Monday, you're probably not the only developer on the team who's waiting. And so now you've got, you know, let's say you have 10 guys or 10 developers waiting. Each one has 5 commits, right? That's 50 commits now that are waiting on Friday to go up until Monday. And in most cases, when companies are not using this kind of rapid iteration cycle, development cycle, it's not that they just wait until the next business day to push. They'll generally wait weeks, if not months, to push out a major release, right? So now you're talking thousands of changes, thousands of commits that are going up at one time. The chance of breaking something it's almost guaranteed, right? You're almost guaranteed that release is going to break something. So then no one wants to do it. And it gets pushed back even further, which just compounds the problem, right? The longer you wait, the more changes need to be pushed up, which means there's a greater risk of breaking the application.
So before we went down this Kubernetes route, when you all would push up changes, would you sometimes wait until the weekend when, I guess, user activity would be low? For what we do, that's when user activity would be low. So is that like a practice that you would have done before we went down this road?
Yeah, that's a pretty common practice in the industry. Waiting till the weekend, waiting till you have low user activity, which is the weekends or early in the morning, right? When no one wants to be doing this kind of work. You don't want to have your top paid senior developers releasing a product at 2 a.m. and then have it go wrong and they have to debug something at 3 a.m. It's just not good.
Yeah, it sounds like it's made a development job a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something Zach can speak to, is how Kubernetes, our rollout of Kubernetes has affected the daily life of our developers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for us, Kubernetes and I guess they came in waves, but Docker and Kubernetes kind of came together for us. And just to start, Docker was huge because it made it really simple for us to all work on our local machines offline and know that we're pretty much guaranteed to no more of this. It's working on my machine. I don't see it on my machine. Those kinds of miscommunications. So there's that. There's also just the biggest thing about it, I think, is how little we have to think about it. Yeah, it used to be like a nightmare. We'd have to kind of spend time on it. I don't spend time doing anything for Kubernetes, or for releases. I just hit the button, go in, check, make sure I didn't break anything, release to staging, and then release staging to production, and yeah, it's kind of seamless. It's not work to release to deploy to production anymore. Yeah.
So if you had to guess at the number of hours that you, as our CTO who manages our dev team, got back just by rolling this out, I'm sure there was time in putting into how we utilize it for our stack. But if you had to guess at how much time you bought back each week, what would you guess?
Well, it was we probably had an incident probably like once a month for a while where we'd release and then we'd have to jump in and realize something was off and then, go back, roll back and then figure out the bug. Sometimes it wasn't an option to roll back neatly, but now it's always an option to roll back neatly. Yeah, the other stuff I think that you might be talking about too, Ricky, is the ease with which we can now spin up other services. So if we're looking at breaking out the back end of our application into different sort of domains to work with different kinds of processes or different kinds of data, having this in place makes that stuff a lot easier to set up, and then we don't have to or we get to do the work of conducting them together in JSON files rather than Linux.
Right. And I think what Zach's getting at here is we've also taken this added step of not just implementing Kubernetes, but all of the setup scripts that Kubernetes uses to do its job. The ones that matter to our application, we keep in our repository along with our application code. So we do something called infrastructure as code now, which means let's say we want to change the way a service runs. We want to, instead of having 3 pods or 3 versions of our application running at all times, we want to have 4 for some reason. Under a basic Kubernetes installation, you would need to go into Kubernetes and make that adjustment. What we do is our developers actually have access to make that change as a code change in our repository, commit it, push it up, have it tested, and then it gets rolled out to our Kubernetes cluster, which will then make the update. So we actually don't have to get into Kubernetes and make a lot of adjustments on a daily basis. Our DevOps team, on the other hand, the team that actually manages the cluster, they do actually work on the cluster on a daily basis. But again, it's a different mindset for the developer, the front end developer now.
So what I'm hearing, because I don't work in the code at all, but we sort of have a philosophy with our front end product at Bento about organization and efficiency. You all do that, it sounds like, from the back end as well. So this isn't just something we try to provide for our clients. Like, this is who we are. This is how we operate as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're a small team. You know, the only way that we can provide Bento the way that we want to be able to provide it is if we do things like this. You know, Kubernetes was or is the system that it was open sourced by Google, right? It's the container management system that Google uses to manage their millions of containers every day. And so we're, as a small team, we're able now to leverage that type of work, you know, that type of product here. And it's the only way that we're able to provide these types of service, this level of service.
So I hear that you guys are giving Kubernetes the thumbs up. So if there's someone listening who is considering it, you all would consider this a positive change that we made.
Yes. And on the consumer side of things, you know, the business case for it, you know, there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained, sure. But the deal is when we want to build out a new feature for a client, our developers can work on it, get a very, you know, minimal version of it working so that it can be tested, and they can roll that out to the client or to the stakeholder, you know, in a day, in hours, if need be, instead of having to wait weeks to get critical feedback to make that feature better. So that way you can start making money on that feature as a business owner. It's faster time to market is what this all results in. Faster time to market and better quality when you get there.
Right. So that's how we can talk about the better, faster, cheaper. Like, we're essentially, because we do things like this, we can make something custom just a lot faster than we could in the past, or other teams can, because of how we approach it.
Yep. And it's always foundational for us. So we don't do things here one-off, right? Everything we do, we learn from, and we build on top of. And so that's it. Everything you heard today was just a testament to that same philosophy.
Yeah. Keeps those iteration loops small.
Yes, short and fast.
Very cool. Well, thanks for the lesson today, guys.
Awesome. It was fun. I love talking about this kind of stuff.
Yes, I know you guys do.
Awesome.